Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about the Tigray conflict in Ethiopia and the roots of Ethiopia's ethnic divide. Ethiopia is a nation in conflict. The ongoing struggle in the Tigray region between the federal government and the once powerful TPLF, which used to rule the country, is just one of the many regional conflicts in Ethiopia. But even if the federal government wins the military conflict, a political solution is still needed. So while the media is focused on the Tigray conflict, not enough people are talking about the complex origins of this conflict and what solutions are needed to unite this divided nation. Let's find out in this video. Just before we start, don't forget to subscribe for more political analysis videos and hit that bell notification while you're at it. A nation divided. Government forces have allegedly scored a decisive victory by capturing the capital of the Tigray region from forces operating under the banner of the TPLF, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, allegedly because all internet and phone lines in the region have been shut down. Now, the TPLF began fighting against the federal government in early November and claims to represent the Tigrayan people. But this conflict is not just about ethnicity, but also about politics and economics. Nor is this the only conflict in Ethiopia. On top of that, Tigrayans have not always been dominant in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is an incredibly diverse country with over 80 different ethnic groups. The largest are the Oromo, who are 35% of the population, the Amhara, who are 26%, the Somali, who are 6%, and the Tigrayans, who are just 6%. Religion is another divider, with 62% being Christians, 43% of whom are Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and 18% of whom are Protestants, while about 32% are Muslims. But to understand the current situation, we have to understand how ethnic differences have been politicized in Ethiopia. The rise of the TPLF. For much of Ethiopian history, the Tigrayans were not in fact the dominant ethnic group. During the period of the monarchy that lasted until 1974, and also during the period of communism that lasted until 1991, power was centralized in the hands of the Amhara people. Most of the government officials were Amhara, the official language was Amharic, and the people were expected to assimilate into the Amhara culture. And during the communist regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, the program of forced collectivization of agriculture included the forced resettlement of Amhara farmers onto the lands of other ethnic groups. These policies not only led to mass starvation and displacement, but also to the formation of ethnically based rebel groups, triggering the Ethiopian Civil War. One of the main rebel groups in this conflict was the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, representing the Tigrayan people. And so in 1989, when these rebel groups united to form the EPRDF, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, I know it's a mouthful, it was dominated by the Tigrayan TPLF faction. And so in 1991, the EPRDF coalition succeeded in overthrowing the communist military regime of Haile Mariam. In the chaos that followed, Eritrea declared independence and seceded from Ethiopia. Now, in order to resolve the ethnic tensions in the country, the EPRDF decided to create an ethnically based system of federalism. That basically meant that each of the major ethnic groups would have their own state where they could run their own affairs, and that they would have equal representation at the federal level. In fact, they even introduced a provision into the Ethiopian constitution that gave every state the right to secede from the union if they wanted to. While this looked good on paper, the reality was very different. You see, the EPRDF, although it was a coalition of different ethnic groups, was dominated by the Tigrayan TPLF. It was the TPLF who had led the rebellion, and it was the TPLF who had the resources and manpower to run the government. The Oromo and Amhara members of the EPRDF were simply co-opted by the Tigrayan elite. It was federalism in name only. And so where Ethiopia had been dominated for a century by the Amhara, it was now dominated by the Tigrayans, who made up just 6% of the population. Ethiopia was now, for all intents and purposes, a one-party state led by Meles Zenawi. But this system of government was not sustainable. Something had to give. The winds of change. And so the spark that lit the fire was something called the Addis Ababa Master Plan. Take a look at this map. You see, Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, is its own state, but is totally surrounded by the state of Oromia. And so in 2014, the federal government, with its Addis Ababa master plan, wanted to expand the capital city, Addis Ababa, by forcibly taking land from Oromo farmers in the surrounding Oromia state, with little compensation. And so this move, which was seen as an attack on the Oromo people, led to mass protests in 2015. And the government's response was a brutal crackdown, leaving 700 dead and 23,000 arrested. But this crackdown backfired, and soon the protests blew up to be not just against the Addis Ababa master plan, but against the political and economic marginalization of the Oromo, Amhara and other ethnic groups, human rights abuses, and against the government itself. In fact, even before this, ethnic insurgencies had emerged in the Somali and Oromo region. By 2016, the government declared a state of emergency, but the protests continued. By 2018, Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn was forced to resign. Now at this stage, the Tigray elite realized that they had to give something in order to calm down the protesters. And so in 2018, a new Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, was chosen, who was born to a Muslim Oromo father and a Christian Amhara mother. The Tigray-dominated EPRDF thought that by nominating an Oromo, they could calm tensions and still maintain power. But at this stage, the Oromo and Amhara factions within the EPRDF realized that they could either side with the unpopular federal government or join the side of the protesters and implement reforms. And so that's what they did. The Tigrayan elite was sidelined, and Abiy Ahmed legalized opposition parties and armed groups, freed thousands of journalists and political prisoners, apologized for past mistakes of the government, introduced freedom of speech and freedom of the press, fired many members of the old government, and promised free and fair elections by August 2020. And when it came to foreign policy, he made a peace deal with Eritrea to resolve the 20-year border dispute that came from a war back in the 90s that had left 100,000 people dead. It was these actions that earned Abiy Ahmed the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019. By all indications, Ethiopia was on the path to democracy and ethnic harmony. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. The opening of the political space also allowed for opening of old wounds from long-held grievances. Ethno-nationalist political movements have mobilized in all regions of Ethiopia. Inter-ethnic violence has increased, with up to 3 million people being displaced as a result. And in order to respond to this, Abiy Ahmed's government has increasingly relied on authoritarian measures. At the same time, for many in the old TPLF elite, the pace of change was too fast. The Tigray Rebellion. Dissatisfaction among the old TPLF elite resulted in an assassination attempt on Abiy Ahmed in June 2018. The man who orchestrated the assassination attempt was then given shelter by the Tigray regional government. The perception that they were being sidelined increased when Abiy Ahmed ditched the EPRDF and formed his own party, the Prosperity Party, to compete in the elections. The Oromo and Amhara factions of the EPRDF quickly joined this new Prosperity Party, but the Tigrayan TPLF refused to join. Instead, the TPLF moved its headquarters from the capital, Addis Ababa, to Mekelle, the regional capital of the Tigray region. At the same time, Abiy Ahmed began prosecuting old members of the TPLF government for crimes committed during the dictatorship, which enraged them even more. But the final straw came when Abiy Ahmed indefinitely postponed the elections because of the coronavirus, which would mean that Abiy Ahmed would be in power longer than the constitution allows. In response, in September, the TPLF decided to hold its own elections in the Tigray region, which it won by overwhelming numbers. And so because of this, the TPLF argued that the federal government no longer had any authority because its term had expired. Now at this point, the media ignores a critical dimension in this conflict. It wasn't just about ethnicity or politics, but also economics. You see, during the EPRDF era, the TPLF elites had control over the commanding heights of the Ethiopian economy. This included the $3.5 billion that came from foreign aid, the rents from the 3.6 million hectares of land that was leased out to foreign investors, and the revenues from state-owned enterprises. It is this which the TPLF is fighting for, not ordinary Tigrayans who benefited little from TPLF dominance. By limiting TPLF influence over the country, Abiy Ahmed has hit them where it hurts. That is what this conflict is about. By the time that elections were being held in Tigray, it was too late. The federal government refused to recognize the legitimacy of the election, and soon after, TPLF forces reportedly attacked military headquarters in Tigray. What has followed is a devastating conflict that has produced thousands of refugees and reports of alleged war crimes. The conflict also took on an international dimension when TPLF rockets hit Eritrea, and Eritrea has now reportedly intervened on the side of the Ethiopian federal government. Federal forces have taken the regional capital Mekelle, and in all likelihood the federal government will win the military conflict. But there is a very real danger that this conflict will spill over into neighboring regions of Ethiopia. Even before this conflict, there were ongoing ethnic insurgencies by the Oromo Liberation Front in Oromia and the Ogaden National Liberation Front in the Somali region. There are ethno-nationalist politicians openly inciting hatred against local ethnic minorities. This has led to people being chased out of their homes or killed in pogroms because they were of the wrong ethnicity. As a result, up to 3 million Ethiopians have been displaced from their homes, almost 3% of the population. The assassination of Oromo musician and activist Hachalu Hundessa in June led to a wave of protests and violence. If these conflicts escalate into full-scale civil war, it will be a humanitarian disaster, destabilizing the entire region. So while the military strength of the federal government is likely to remain, in order to achieve real peace in the country, a political solution is needed. A federal solution. Many people blame the current system of ethnic federalism for creating the ethnic divide in Ethiopia. But this is only partially true. These ethnic divisions already existed before and will continue to exist even without this system. On top of that, the system of federalism created by the EPRDF was never truly implemented. Far from sharing power between ethnic groups, the Tigray and TPLF remained dominant. So while the system did create greater space for ethnic cultural expression, because there was no democracy, giving power to the regions had little real meaning. So it was not that federalism failed, it was never implemented. However, there are some areas in which ethnic federalism has exacerbated ethnic tensions. By creating ethnically based regional states, Ethiopia solidified ethnicity as the basis of political organization. This created two problems. Number one is that by linking each state to the local ethnic majority, you create a system where the so-called original ethnic groups in their respective regions are empowered at the expense of local minorities. Suddenly, there is a push for states to become more homogeneous, and so people of a different ethnic group are seen as settlers or newcomers who don't belong. And this has led to many instances of people being driven out of their homes for belonging to the wrong ethnic group. In fact, the constitutions of some regional states even explicitly state that sovereignty rests with the majority group, excluding minorities. It has also led to increasing border conflicts between different regional states, and also with ethnic groups who are too small to have their own states, such as the Sidama. Number two is that because federal funds are allocated on the basis of ethnicity, politicians are incentivized to operate on ethnic lines and form ethnic parties. Because an ethnic group having its own administrative region grants them access to federal funding, local resources, and political power. On top of that, many administrative posts are allocated on the basis of ethnicity rather than merit, and so the result is that ethnicity is both politicized and made into a static, permanent identity. This ignores the fact that many Ethiopians are ethnically mixed. People migrate between different regions, and ethnicity and culture evolve over time. Ethnicity is a social construct, not a primordial characteristic. By placing the emphasis on ethnicity, you ignore people's other identities and prevent the formation of a common Ethiopian identity. Now, given these problems, some have suggested that a centralized unitary state is needed. Centralization will never work. It was tried before and it failed. The country is too diverse to force all the people under one government. If Ethiopia is to remain unified, power must be devolved to the regions so that each ethnic group is free to govern themselves locally while having fair representation at the federal level. In fact, it was centralization in the hands of the Serbs which led to the breakup of Yugoslavia. Abolishing federalism won't end ethnic division. People will simply find another outlet for expressing ethnic politics, and in Ethiopia that outlet would most likely be violent. So rather than trying to pretend that ethnic differences don't exist, we must find a way to accommodate them. The reason the previous federal system failed was precisely because it did not do this. The country was dominated by the TPLF, and any power sharing that existed was only on paper, not in practice. Both India and Canada have managed to reduce ethnic tensions and secessionist tendencies using federal arrangements. It is critical that whatever system of federalism is adopted, that the rights of local minorities are guaranteed, and the government focuses on promoting a common Ethiopian citizenship over and above ethnic identity. But the most critical factor for this federal solution to work is democracy. Abiy Ahmed is staying in power beyond his constitutional term. While in the beginning, when we knew very little about the coronavirus, it was reasonable to delay the elections, we have now seen that it is possible to hold an election during the coronavirus so long as the necessary precautions are taken. Coronavirus is not going to go away anytime soon, so it makes no sense to keep postponing elections. Abiy Ahmed was not elected, and he was put in his position for a very specific purpose: to facilitate the transition to democracy. He must fulfill that purpose, and Ethiopians must find a system that can balance ethnic interests while keeping a unified nation. Because an Ethiopia 100 million strong will always be more powerful than a bunch of small, poor, quarreling states. My next video will be on the rising tensions between China and Taiwan, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you to my Patreons for making this video possible. Like, share, and subscribe, because this was my take.